been another busy week in our world. Tariffs, trade wars, new political powers, and a new prime minister. Let's break it all down tonight on the 6 o'clock panel. And we are joined by two great guests who are both pillars of our community. Mary Lou Newbold, who's the president of Think Local First in Victoria. Aaron Stone, the CEO of South Island Prosperity Partnership, or SIP for short. Thank you both for jumping on with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Let's talk about this crazy little world that we're living in right now. And a big piece of it has been Buy Canadian, Think Local. Have you seen that on a local level so far?
Sure. Our members are definitely impacted by this type of conversation.
Right.
Think Local First has 160 members, 8 of them in grocery, 3 of them are in liquor, and I think those are the 2 sectors we've been talking about the most lately.
Yeah, we certainly have. And then on the financial side, are we seeing the financial prosperity? I mean, there's a lot of concern about tariffs and what that does. As in the short term, is it working so far?
Well, I think that, first of all, I want to say Think Local is the way we should always think about
Agreed.
Developing a more circular economy, to keep more of the money that circulates through our economy in the local economy and instead of exporting it out. So it aligns with our values, I think, both as a region, but from an economic development perspective, Think Local is an absolutely critical initiative. Broader, we want to think British Columbia and then Canada, but it's really important to continue to support our local entrepreneurs, and that's a really big focus for our organization, is how do we bring both that attention to the local circular economy, but how do we continue to build a more resilient economy by keeping more of that money circulating within our local trade areas.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's funny, I was at the grocery store with my wife and we were doing that. We're making sure we're picking all things Canadian. She's like, why didn't we do this before? And like, we should have, and we should be, and we will be in the future. But I'm interested, Mary Lou, long term, what's the sustainability of this and being more kind of inside here?
Well, I think part of it is knowledge.
Yes.
And people making decisions like you and your wife when
Yeah.
you're grocery shopping, and then extending that into a habit that goes beyond just this current time. And to Aaron's point of the circular economy, it can be as much of 66 cents of a dollar spent locally stays in the community,
Wow.
whereas on a larger corporate level, it's 11 cents.
Wow.
That's a lot of money that's leaving our area if we are not making local decisions.
Yeah, Premier David Eby, he's been strong, taking all the American booze out of BC liquor stores, taxing some of the big trucks, but also giving himself some pretty wide-ranging, sweeping powers yesterday. So what have you thought of BC's response and really just where we're at right now with it?
I think it's necessary in a really unpredictable time to be able to be nimble and respond without the long, protracted legislative process. I know that in our meetings this morning in the Ledge that they were talking about the checks and balances that are there. Any of those short-term introduced legislation or regulation will have to then go through a longer-term legislative process to make it long-term.
Right.
But I think even more importantly, when we're talking about thinking local and pulling back to that conversation, is what can we produce here? What kind of food security can we drive by activating more of our agricultural land? How do we lower barriers to other types of food production on agricultural lands?
As far as from the local perspective, how do they get that support and how do they need that support?
Well, locally, it can be tricky, Paul, because we've got 13 different municipalities.
Right.
So you got 13 mayors.
Right.
You've got between municipal, provincial, and federal. That's a lot of times where the smaller business, sometimes there's confusion as to who does what, who do you turn to. Grants have been cut recently for some of our members. Again, in provincial, federal, we don't know what's going to happen if we're going to have a federal election.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, to Aaron's point, having these conversations just keep happening. We actually have to have some action, and we need all of these layers of government to actually come together quickly.
We have a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, as of this morning. And I'm really interested, Aaron, I know you worked in the public and the private sector a whole heck of a lot. Taking over as the leader of a country, especially in these times, how wild is that right now?
I can't even imagine, to be honest. I think that the heartening thing is the Canadian sort of sovereignty coming together, right? If I were a prime minister, which I wouldn't dare to be, I would be really going coast to coast to coast in this country and really trying to unite Canadians, regardless of what the outcomes of a pending election might look like. I think any leader who is doing it in service to the country needs to say, regardless of our political differences, whether it's Conservative or Liberal or New Democratic Party, we do need to say that as Canadians, there are so many more things that we agree on than that separates us. And maybe sort of take a lesson from what we've seen down south and say maybe it's time to put down the hyper-partisan, divide people narratives and say how can we build a more constructive dialogue in this country that sort of leans away from that kind of populism.
Yeah, and I think now is the time to strike the iron when it's hot, when Canada is binding together. Mary Lou, what would an election, because no doubt we're having one in the fall irregardless, it's likely going to be sooner, what kind of impact will that have at a local level?
You know, Paul, anytime we're having an election, whether it's provincial, federal, this is a government town.
Yes.
We have as much as 4,000 federal workers. That means there's 4,000 people that for a period of time aren't really sure about their jobs or what's going to happen or who their boss is going to be, and that uncertainty plays itself out in how they spend. Again, I go back to that moving target.
Yeah.
This is for local small business owners. This is a bit of PTSD from the pandemic.
It does have those similar vibes, doesn't it?
Where things changed overnight.
Yeah.
The advantage we now have is when we went into that pandemic, we didn't have the skills and tools for that quick adaptability. We've been through something like this as far as the uncertainty and the moving targets. And so at that level, at least, we're a little bit more nimble.
Building on the COVID lessons, the pandemic lessons, we actually relaunched a task force that we had launched during the pandemic that resulted in a lot of really great momentum and change that came out of that for the Greater Victoria business community. We did relaunch that at the close of our conference last week, and we're looking forward to building on the shoulders of that work. We have tremendous opportunity here, and let's not lose sight of that in the to and fro of everyday unpredictability.
And there's a lot of to and fro, but yes, insulating yourself is good. And it is similar to COVID in so many ways of people coming together. But it's different because you could still go to the stores, you could still shop local and support local businesses. Well, Mary Lou Newbold, Aaron Stone, fantastic having you both on the show. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.